The stars outside the observation window of the Astro Horizon shim. Captain Samuel Hayes, a seasoned astronaut, stood at the helm, staring into the vast abyss. His eyes were tired, red-rimmed, a product of sleepless nights. Beside him, Dr. Leah Patel, the mission's lead biologist, worked feverishly at her station, her fingers typing at the console, her face pale. They had been monitoring the incoming data, expecting to find something, anything, in the uncharted zone ahead. A faint, nearly imperceptible pattern emerged from the deep void, a signal they couldn't identify, but one they couldn't ignore. It was unlike any human communication. It came from a massive unknown asteroid field that should have been empty, devoid of life. And yet, the signal pulsed in an irregular pattern, almost as if it were alive. The frequency fluctuated erratically, sending strange waves through the ship systems. At first, "We're in the middle of nowhere," said Lieutenant Emma Reed, a communications officer. She had been listening to the signal for hours, her brow furrowed with confusion and growing fear. "There's no way this could be from a human source. It's not a distress signal. It's not a beacon. This is something else." Captain Hayes turned to Leah. "Can you make sense of it?" Leah, her fingers shaking as she examined the data, hesitated. I don't know. It's like it's trying to communicate, but the structure's completely foreign. It's almost like it's reaching out to us." The words sent an unsettling chill down the spine of every crew member. Days passed. The crew continued to monitor the signal, but something began to shift within the ship. At first, it was subtle, small things. Emma, the communications officer, became withdrawn, her eyes darting around as if she were always on edge. Lieutenant Reed began to speak in strange, fragmented sentences that didn't make sense to anyone. She'd stare at nothing for hours, mumbling to herself, as though she could hear something no one else could. Then, she stopped responding altogether. "We need to check on her," Leah said, her voice strained, as Emma sat motionless in her chair. Her face was pale, lips trembling. Captain Hayes stepped toward her. "Emma, you're scaring us. Talk to us." Emma's eyes flickered toward him, but they were glazed over, unseeing. And then she whispered, in a voice so cold it sent shivers down his spine, "It's here. It knows us. It sees us. It feels us." "Emma," Hayes shouted, but the officer's lips no longer moved. She just stared ahead, her body now rigid, unblinking. That was the moment it all started to unravel. The crew's reactions were all different, but all equally disturbing. The ship's tight corridors became claustrophobic. The air seemed thicker, suffocating. It was as if the very walls of the Astro Horizon were closing in on them, reacting to the signal in ways they couldn't understand. Strange occurrences began to happen in the ship, static-filled intercoms that hummed with unintelligible words, flickering lights that cast shadows in the corners of rooms. Whispers carried on the wind. Then the crew began to see things, visions that weren't there. They heard voices in the walls, soft murmurs that carried a weight of dread. Some swore they saw shadows moving in the corners of their eyes, figures that shouldn't have been there. Some, like Dr. Patel, tried to remain rational, but her mind was beginning to fracture. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced something was watching her. But it wasn't until Lieutenant Reed, now completely incoherent, began to speak of a presence that they realized just how far they had fallen. "It's inside me. It's everywhere," she cried, her voice raw and pleading. "It's in my thoughts. It's in my blood. I can't get it out. Help me. Please help me." Leah couldn't bear to look. The woman who had once been a part of the crew was no longer herself. Her face had twisted into something unrecognizable, eyes wide and frantic, filled with madness. Something in the asteroid field had infected them. Something had gotten inside their minds, bending their thoughts, twisting their perception of reality. The signal was not just a sound. It was a force, a consciousness, and it was feeding on their fears, turning their thoughts into hallucinations. "Get a hold of yourself, Leah," Captain Hayes shouted. grabbing Dr. Patel by the shoulders as she began to sway, her mind slipping further into madness. But the words barely reached her. Her eyes had gone distant. "They're not real, they're not real," she muttered over and over, as her hands reached for her own face, as if trying to tear off her skin. "It's all in my head. It's all in my head, but it's here. It's here." Captain Hayes, now alone in the control room with only his fear and the still raging signal, knew what had to be done. They had to shut it off. They had to sever their connection to whatever it was that had infiltrated their minds. But as he reached for the emergency shutdown, something else happened. The lights flickered, and the voices, louder now, filled the cabin, echoing inside his skull. And then, as he turned to face the control panel, a dark figure materialized in front of him, a shadow with glowing eyes, its form shifting and writhing, not fully solid, but not entirely intangible either. The very air seemed to freeze. It whispered, "You cannot escape." And then the darkness took him. The Astra Horizon was found drifting in the depths of space, its lights flickering. Its crew vanished without a trace, leaving only a faint static-filled transmission on the radio waves. A message from beyond, a warning for any who would dare venture too close to the unknown. Some things are meant to remain silent. The transmission crackled through the empty space, its words distorted by static, but unmistakable in their meaning. Some things are meant to remain silent, the warning. But beyond the message, something stirred, an unnatural hum that vibrated through the radio waves. It wasn't just a broadcast anymore. It was a presence, pushing into the frequency, sending tendrils of distortion out into the cosmos. The hum grew louder, thicker, almost palpable. It was as, back on Earth, a small research station in the Arctic Circle intercepted the signal, its quiet facility designed to track deep space signals. Dr. Emily Vasquez, a young astrophysicist, was alone in the control room late one night when the transmission came through. At first, she thought it was a glitch in the equipment. The faint crackling had been happening more frequently in recent weeks. Odd anomalies, nothing worth investigating too closely. But as the words came through, some things are meant to remain silent. The voice was cold, alien, and unmistakably human. It didn't belong to anyone she knew. The transmission was coming from deep space, a distance far beyond any satellite or exploratory mission. Something that had been lost, something that should not have been found, was being unearthed again. Her heart raced. She'd heard rumors of strange signals coming from the dark expanse beyond the known universe. Some called them echoes of the void. Scientists thought they were just anomalies, random bursts of cosmic radiation. But this felt wrong. The message was too specific, too intentional. Emily leaned forward, her fingers trembling as she typed into the system to trace the origin. Her screen blinked and flickered as the coordinates began to emerge. It was coming from the Astra Horizon, the missing spacecraft that had disappeared months ago during a deep space mission. The one with the vanished crew. Her blood ran cold. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. She knew she should alert the authorities, but there was something within her, something dark and irresistible, urging her to delve deeper. After all, she wasn't like the others. She was one of the few willing to venture into the unknown, to search for answers that others were too afraid to face. Her fingers hovered over the communication button. Should I reach out? Her thoughts were interrupted as a strange, unsettling sensation filled the room. It was like a presence, something intangible but all-consuming, was slowly encroaching upon the control room. The hum from the transmission grew louder, now vibrating in her chest, in her bones. Suddenly, the screen in front of her flickered again, and the image on it shifted. What appeared to be static transformed into an image, an eerie, blurred figure, barely recognizable but undeniably there. A face, or at least what used to be a face, distorted and broken. It was human but not. Her breath caught in her throat as the distorted figure on the screen seemed to smile. The creature's eyes were wide, hollow voids, and its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, contorting into something inhuman. Emily felt the air grow cold, thick with a presence that felt suffocating. She reached out and slammed her hand on the emergency shutdown button, trying to cut off the transmission, but it didn't work. The screen stayed on, the figure growing clearer, its features more grotesque with each passing second. "You shouldn't have listened." The words reverberated inside her mind, not from the speakers, but inside her own skull. The voice wasn't just a message. It was a command, a whisper, a warning from deep within the abyss. She could hear it now, louder and clearer, like it was all around her. It was here. Emily stumbled backward, her heart hammering in her chest. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to disconnect everything, to escape. But the hum had taken on a life of its own, vibrating so intensely that it felt like the walls were shaking. Her vision blurred as she fought to focus on the screen, trying to pull herself together. "You've opened the door." The voice was no longer a transmission. It was here. It was inside her head. The figure on the screen began to shift, its shape contorting violently as it spoke. Its face became a mask of swirling shadows, eyes morphing into endless pits, and then the words came again. "Some things are meant to remain silent, but you've listened. Now, you will hear everything." With a crack that felt like the very fabric of reality was ripping, the lights in the room flickered out, plunging Emily into darkness. Her breath quickened as she fumbled for the emergency lights. She couldn't move fast enough. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the darkness, sounded in the room. Then came the whispers, the same cold, unnatural voice, now surrounding her, filling her ears. "You've heard us now. There's no escape." Emily tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The temperature in the room dropped, her breath turning to mist as a cold wind began to swirl around her. The walls seemed to close in, bending and warping as though they were alive, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. And then, before her eyes, the figure from the screen appeared in front of her, no longer confined to the static image. It was there, a physical manifestation. Its face was a grotesque mosaic of human features, twisted and alien, shifting from one horrifying expression to another. Its body was a mass of writhing limbs, dark and slick, moving in ways that defied logic. Its mouth opened wide, wider than it should have, and it spoke again, only this time, its words came from the depths of her mind. "You were always meant to find us, and now that you have, we are yours." As the darkness consumed her vision, the last thing Emily heard was the faintest whisper. "The door is always open," and then nothing. The research station in the Arctic Circle remained abandoned. The last recorded transmission from Dr. Emily Vasquez was a chilling, garbled message. "Some things are meant to remain silent, but I listened. I... The door to the unknown had been opened again, and this time there was no turning back. Remember, the darkness always holds a story. Until the next terrifying tale, stay tuned with Campfire Horror Story,